Senator Worrell.
Thank you, Mr. President. And I rise to make my contribution to this debate on the road traffic amendment. Now, Mr. President, this bill was introduced under a lot of fanfare, and it is unfortunate that a simple piece of legislation that you would have to do so much PR in terms of trying to make it right, which would suggest that if you need to do so much PR and so much corrections in order to make it right and to help people to understand the true context of the legislation, and to also go against the wide sentiment of many Barbadians that believe that it is not absolutely necessary, it may suggest that you may very well be out of touch with the concerns of the people of the country, and that you may need to review the piece of legislation that you are amending and you are bringing, and bring something more appropriate to address the concerns and the real needs of the citizens of the country. Now, it is not the average Barbadian that got the message out of context, but the truth is that the spin was put on this in the wrong way by the chief spokesperson for the government in a press conference to deal with crime, and coming out of that press conference, this was the only solution which was offered. And that chief spokesperson for the government, if the other members on the other side are unaware, was none less than the Prime Minister of Barbados and the leader of government in Barbados, the leader of the cabinet, who introduced the idea of the necessity to have tint legislation in Barbados as a part of the crime prevention strategy in none less than a press conference to deal with the increase in crime in this country. So for Barbadians to run away thinking that this was the government's sole method and solution to deal with crime, it is not their fault. It was introduced by the chief spokesperson for the government of Barbados, none other than the leader of the cabinet, the Prime Minister of this country. Introduced this in a press conference dealing with crime. So if Barbadians are of the impression that this tint legislation is the government's sole weapon in its arsenal to deal with crime, that misinterpretation was put by none other than the government itself and the chief spokesperson for the government, the Prime Minister of this country. So be that as it may, that this may have come as a request from the police in terms of when they do a stop and search and they need to be able to see inside of vehicles, that was totally thrown out of the window and lost upon many persons. And it was also lost on many persons how Tint will help to deal with crime in Barbados, when in majority of the situations, Barbadians are recognizing an escalating crime situations where people are driving on motorcycles and terrorizing neighborhoods. When people are going on foot and shooting up communities, including the death of an innocent 14-year-old, and they were not in vehicles with tint. They were not in vehicles with tint. So all of these are things that Barbadians are concerned about, and they would want to hear and see from the government of Barbados the introduction of more frontal policies that would actually address and deal with the escalating crime situation in Barbados. One such policy, I believe, could be the fact that the police need to be respected and that their orders and communications must be adhered to and carried out. And don't care who you are in Barbados, even if you have the telephone number of the Prime Minister, the Attorney General, a Minister of Government, you should not be able to call them and tell them that a police is interrupting your business and stopping you from doing your work, and then you hear that the police are not given their toll to back down from what they're doing. That is the situation that the police feel aggrieved about as well. But I did not see the government of Barbados rush to address that, as they rush with haste to address one single concern, that we need to have a reduction in the level of tint on vehicles so that we can easily see into vehicles. Why not address that? And the way how Barbadians respect the police, the authority of the police, and that recognize that if a police gives you an order, that you are required to follow that instruction, and that even I, as an opposition senator, can't change it for you, and therefore a prime minister should not be able to change it for you, attorney general should not be able to step in and change that for you. Allow the police to carry out, follow the instructions and the order of the police, and maintain law and order in this country. That is what the government should have come with. If the government had come today with that, in some enforcing that, I'm certain that many Barbadians would get behind it and champion it. But instead, they come with something which they need to introduce a lot of PR and a lot of fluff in order to sell to the people of Barbados, when the people of Barbados have already decided, Mr. President, that they will have none of it. This speaks to a tone-deaf government, which is not listening and it is not hearing the cries of the people of Barbados. The second issue with regard to this, when it was also introduced by the chief spokesperson for the government, they did a funny thing. I want money. Many Barbadians remember this. I want money, with the snapping of the hands and all, as though you are in a rum shop. I want money. That is what Barbadians remember when this piece of legislation was introduced as a crime-solving measure at a press conference dealing with the escalating increase in crime in Barbados. I want money. So you don't expect that Barbadians will take offense at it and see it as none other than a money grab? Because one, it will not change anything. Two, it just seems as a way of drawing the little bit of money out of the pockets of the people of Barbados by an authoritarian government. That is how Barbadians feel it, Mr. President. That is how Barbadians are seeing it. A government that has the majority of the seats in the House of Assembly, 29 seats, and therefore can pass any legislation which they feel like, because they know that there are no seats in the House, not enough seats in the House of Assembly, or either in this place, that will change that. That is the situation in this country. So obviously, Mr. President, the people of Barbados will take offense against the legislation because they see it as a tax grab. I want money. Now, Mr. President, in coming to some of the aspects of the legislation, there are also issues in where the amendment and the regulation has been drafted, and issues with the amount of authority which have been prescribed to the minister with responsibility for the parent legislation, which is the road traffic, which in most cases would be the Minister of Transport and Works. It is believed that with this amendment, that it not only speaks to the actual portion of the regulation which deals with the tint, but it also has a bearing on all of the regulations and all of the offenses in the road traffic regulations, which I am not certain if many Barbadians recognize this, but the way how this is worded, it states 12.1A1, this section applies to such regulation as the minister may prescribe. So it means that the minister has the authority because the regulations don't come to this place, they only don't come to this place for discussion, has the authority to pass regulations in the future where this $500 penalty may apply. Or the minister may say this section applies to such regulations as the minister may prescribe. And going on to part 2, notwithstanding any other provisions of this act, the minister may by regulation prescribe the circumstances in which a person who through contravention of any regulation to which this section applies, any regulation to which this section applies, commits an offense may be offered an opportunity to discharge any liability that would arise out of the conviction for the offense by payment of an initial penalty of $500. Now, Mr. President, that is the issue. It says any regulation to which this applies. It means that for a simple speeding ticket, if the minister so desires, he can apply this $500 penalty on to. For a simple offense as relates to not having appropriate wind screens and wipers on your wind screens, could be applied that penalty too. A broken tail light, that penalty could be applied too. A tail light that is not broken as in with the glass, and a tail light that is not working, that penalty can be applied too. So why are we giving a minister so much latitude in order to come at their whim and fancy to change regulations and also to add additional regulations onto this? It is not my drafting of it. I would consider that you go back to the drafters if this was not the intention, that it applies to all of the categories of the road traffic regulation. And there are many categories of the road traffic regulations to which it could apply. There are many categories, Mr. President, in which it could apply. So I'm thinking that this is giving the minister and it is giving the administration far too much authority in applying this $500 penalty on simple Barbadians. What are we doing in this country, Mr. President? It is giving too much latitude to the minister, and it could only be seen by the public as none other than a money grab, since we were told we want money, I want money. Those were the words coming from the mouth of the Prime Minister of Barbados in that press conference to address the escalating crime situation in this country when this same Tint legislation was introduced. And now we have an amendment which give free rein to the minister to apply this $500 penalty to any aspects of the regulations under the road traffic amendment. If that was not the intention before it is passed in this place, I would suggest that you go back to the drafters and have an appropriate amendment done to limit the capacity of the minister to apply this $500 penalty at whim and fancy to any area under this regulation as stated here in the amendment brought before us today, Mr. President. So on that, Mr. President, this is not worthy to be passed in this chamber today. If we want to hear the people of Barbados, if we want to recognize that the people of Barbados are not satisfied with this legislation. Mr. President, we could speak at length about the entire legislation, but it will not do anything to change the crime situation significantly in this country. The police also asked for greater access to community policing in Barbados. You're not seeing anything being done about that. Things like that would go much further in terms of addressing the crime situation in Barbados. And it's not coming from Senator Worrell, but it came from the National Task Force on Crime Prevention in Barbados, which is one of the recommendations that we need to increase community policing in this country so that the police have more police officers trained in community policing. Yes, we do have it. And so that the police will be able to develop relationships with persons in the communities, especially those at-risk communities, and help to bring about some lifestyle changing programs in those communities. When those programs are properly operational, you have the Police Boys Club in Bay Street. Why is it that only in Bay Street? Why couldn't we have an intervention which would see police boys clubs being set up in more communities across Barbados so that young people would have greater access to interacting with the police and benefit from the services of the police boys club? So you could have one in the north, you can have one in the east, you can have one in central Barbados, you can have one on the south and on the west coast. And that, Mr. President, I would say today that if the government had brought a resolution or legislation to increase the numbers of police sports clubs across Barbados so that you would have greater interaction, that would do more for the people of Barbados in terms of fighting crime in this country, because you will be dealing with it from the source. So the Tint is not going to change it. The Tint will do nothing about it. Since it was introduced, the crime has escalated. This week alone, or probably last week, you had a murder nearly every single day, Mr. President. And the legislation was introduced, so I don't see that it is deterring any criminals in Barbados. We can go on, Mr. President, with measures that would also help in terms of crime fighting, and I think that these are things that the police would want. The police have been asking for an increase in their numbers for a number of years, the number of police in the Barbados police force, because they don't have enough. And we are recognizing a situation where persons are joining, but they're quickly leaving the force as well, because the pay, as far as they're concerned, is not adequate. So you have a number of policemen who get the training and then they seek better opportunities in other Caribbean countries such as Bermuda or Cayman Islands. So we are losing our police in this way because obviously the pay is not enough to keep them here. And if you can have a trained cadre of policemen coming up through the ranks, that you are able to fill all of the vacancies within the police force, especially in the specialist areas, it will go a long way in terms of crime prevention and also fighting crime in this country, far further than any Tint legislation would go at this present time, Mr. President. So I'm certain that that is one of the recommendations made by the police force, but the government has turned a blind eye to it. They have been tone deaf to it. They have not heard it. They have not even responded
Mr. President,
to it.
I rise on a point of order.
What's the point of order?
The honourable member is misleading the House. The honourable member, Mr. President, is sitting in a space where the police service has asked for many of these things under his administration and were ignored. This administration, however, has increased the number of persons allocated to the police service, including the number of persons who can be recruited. They have increased the allocation to the Barbados Police Service. They have increased the salaries 3 times in the last 8 years. They have also provided for provisions for island constables. So it is disingenuous for a member of the Democratic Labour Party that decimated the Barbados Police Service to attempt to attribute to us that which is really rightfully belonging only to the members of the Democratic Labour Party.
Please proceed, Senator Worrell.
Thank you, Mr. President. And I continue, Mr. President. Breathalyzer testing. Now, the government, in order to introduce this legislation and to make it work, the government spent money to bring into Barbados the equipment to test the level of tint on the vehicles. This was mentioned by Senator Cummins in her introduction. But yet still to this day, we cannot have breathalyzer testing being done in Barbados on any regular basis Why haven't we spent the money in terms of bringing in that equipment as well? That would also help in terms of reducing the number of accidents on our roads, especially around periods such as crop over, where people are more likely to go out, enjoy a few drinks, and then attempt to drive back home. If the government was really serious and expected us to believe that this piece of legislation was introduced simply because of the requests and the needs of the police service and the people of Barbados, we would also have today breathalyzer testing in this country. Because the same way that you can spend money to bring in the equipment to test the level of tint on the windscreens, you could have also purchased the equipment and outfit the police with the equipment to do breathalyzer testing in this country. I have heard nothing from the government in terms of restricting the importation of the tint, which they believe to be too dark to be placed on vehicles. I would think that would have been a more proactive approach in terms of dealing with the legislation, because we don't manufacture the tint in Barbados as far as I know. The minister responsible for industry and innovation might be in a better position to answer that question whenever he gets around to speaking to the public of Barbados on matters relating to his ministry, Mr. President. But perhaps he can let us know whether or not we manufacture the tint in Barbados. If we don't manufacture the tint in Barbados, therefore we can place restrictions on the tint that is imported into the country. So those are things that would help in terms, it would go a long way of helping the police, and it would go a long way in terms of maintaining the law and order. So perhaps these things can be done in conjunction. So instead of just looking to place the heavy fine, you can also put the proactive measures in place so that the tint that is the wrong tint cannot be imported, and therefore it would not be available for use in Barbados in the first place. All of these things can be done, Mr. President. But the issue and the reason why this government is fighting so much, Mr. President, and knocking all over the place is because Barbadians have woken up to the realization that this administration does not have the first clue as to what needs to be done to fight crime in this country. And that has broken the hearts of many Barbadians and left them fearful, including the elderly in this country, Mr. President, who woke up to the news on Sunday morning reading the leading newspaper about the rape of an elderly person in Barbados, in her house, in the precincts of her household. And Tint had nothing to do with it, Mr. President. But Barbadians are recognizing that the level of crime in this country is out of hand. But this government is not coming with any of the proactive measures necessary in order to fight crime in this country. All we are seeing every single week, a different murder, a different shooting, a different stabbing, robberies all over that have businesses fearful of opening after a certain period of time. Tint will not solve or address any of that. Those are the bread and butter, kitchen table issues that Barbadians would like to hear being addressed by this administration. And if they would do what they were elected to do and address these issues, they would not have to come here in this Senate chamber today to launch a PR campaign just to launch a misguided and unwanted and an unnecessary piece of legislation that will do nothing to change the situation for the people of Barbados, that will not make the elderly feel any less fearful during the day that they will pull down their windows and lock their doors and not answer a single call unless they know who is coming to their house. That will not do anything for women driving along dark roads at night, that they will lock their doors, roll up their windows, and if the police or any police vehicle come behind them, that they will drive to a lighted community before they stop the vehicle to allow the policeman to peer in. That is the level of the crime situation in this country, because people are being attacked on the roads and their vehicles are being stolen at night. You cannot go out in this country without the risk of robbery, the risk of loss of property, and the risk of loss of life, and yet you can come to me today and expect me to believe that a Tint legislation, which is a worthless piece of legislation, not even worth the paper which it has been printed on, will do something to address the crime situation in this country. Get real. That is what the people of Barbados are asking for the Mayor Motley-led government to get real. It is not all about money, because money is causing the problem in crime situation in the first place. And for the government to go out on a plank, a platform, we want money, the criminals want money too. And that is where the crime situation in this country is spiraling out of hand. So don't come to us today on this sanctimonious platform thinking that you're doing something for the people of Barbados when really and truly you are not. You have no moral authority in this country to speak about crime in this country, because you have allowed the crime situation in this country to gallop way ahead of you, and I do not think that you have the moral authority, you don't have the ideas, you don't have the wisdom to pull it back. So I will say to you today, this is a worthless piece of legislation, and it is a waste of the time of the people of Barbados. And the police time could be better spent addressing actual issues that would fight crime in this country. Thank you.